Everyone expected the funeral to be quiet, but instead it became a scene of chaos no one would ever forget. Everyone in the church froze when the massive police German shepherd climbed into the little girl's coffin. At first, the officers thought he was confused, grieving, refusing to let go of the only child who had ever shown him kindness. But when the police dog pressed his head gently against her tiny chest, then refused to move, panic rippled through the room. People screamed, thinking he had gone mad. Officers tried to pull him away, but he growled, something he had never done in his entire service. "Why is the dog acting like this?" someone whispered. "And why does he keep nudging the girl's hand, as if begging her to wake up?" He knew something everyone else didn't. He was warning them. But for what? No one at the funeral understood what was happening. He growled at anyone who got too close, his grief roaring deeper than anyone imagined. Everyone thought this was just a heartbreaking goodbye. And then he began scratching wildly, whimpering, barking, tearing at the coffin like he was trying to dig someone out. Her parents stood in shock. Mourners whispered in confusion. One of the officers, trembling, whispered, "Why won't the dog leave her side? What is he sensing?" Then her mother collapsed to her knees, and a whisper spread through the room. Why is the dog acting like she's still alive? But no one had any answer. The police dog was trying to tell them something no one was prepared to hear. What happened next shocked everyone. Before we start, make sure to hit like and subscribe. And really, I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. I love seeing how far our stories travel. The funeral hall was drowning in silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the heavy, suffocating silence that clings to every heartbeat and refuses to let go. Rows of mourners filled the room, their faces pale, their expressions frozen between disbelief and heartbreak. No one could accept what they were seeing. No one believed they should have been standing here today, saying goodbye to a child who hadn't even learned to spell her own name yet. At the center of the hall, beneath the shimmering light of the chandelier, lay a small white coffin trimmed with soft lace. Inside it was a little girl no older than 5, her golden curls brushed neatly around her delicate face. She looked as though she was merely sleeping, peaceful, untouched by the tragedy that had stolen her life far too soon. A pink dress wrapped her tiny frame, and a pearl bracelet encircled her wrist, a gift from her mother just weeks before. But it wasn't the girl who left the crowd stunned. It was the massive German shepherd lying inside the coffin with her. The dog's enormous frame curled protectively around her body, his head resting gently on her shoulder as though guarding her one last time. His eyes, dark, glassy, and full of unbearable grief, shifted only when someone tried to approach. A low rumble vibrated in his chest, warning them to stay back. He wasn't aggressive, he was heartbroken, and no one had the heart to pull him away. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Mothers pressed hands over their mouths. Fathers held back tears. Even officers in full uniform stood frozen, unsure how to react. This wasn't normal. No police dog had ever behaved like this. Not at a funeral, not anywhere. The little girl's parents stood at a distance, unable to step closer. Her mother trembled violently, clutching her husband's arm as silent sobs shook through her. Her father stared blankly, unable to process the scene in front of him. Their daughter, and the dog who refused to let her go. Officer Blake, standing near the back, felt a chill crawl up his spine. He had been the one who responded to the call the night the girl died. He had seen the dog's reaction, heard the desperate howls, watched the animal refuse to leave her side even then. But nothing prepared him for this. A funeral was supposed to be a final goodbye. Yet the dog's behavior whispered something else entirely, as if he didn't believe this was goodbye at all. And deep down, Blake felt an unsettling truth rising in his chest. Something about this funeral didn't feel right. Whispers rippled through the hall as mourners watched the German shepherd with a mixture of shock and aching sorrow. No matter how gently people called his name, no matter how softly they tried to coax him out, the dog refused to move even an inch. His body rose and fell in slow, trembling breaths, but his gaze never left the little girl's still face. Every time someone attempted to approach the coffin, he lifted his head and released a low, warning growl, not from aggression, but from pure, desperate protectiveness. Officer Daniels, one of the senior officers present, stepped forward cautiously. "Easy, boy," he murmured, hands out in a calming gesture. But the moment he neared the coffin, the dog lowered his ears, bared his teeth ever so slightly, and pushed his head closer against the girl's shoulder, shielding her, guarding her, refusing to let anyone come near. Daniels backed away slowly, shaken. "He's not letting anyone touch her." A wave of discomfort rolled through the room. People exchanged uneasy glances. Some cried harder, unable to bear the sight of such loyalty from an animal who clearly believed he still had a job to do. A dog mourning a child was heartbreaking enough, but this wasn't normal grief. This was instinct. This was protection, almost as though the dog sensed something the humans didn't. The funeral director, an older man with trembling hands, wiped sweat from his brow. "We've never seen anything like this," he whispered. "He's been like this since they brought her in. He hasn't eaten. He hasn't drunk water. He just lies there, watching her." From the back of the hall, Blake watched intently. The dog, named Shadow, had worked with him before. Blake knew how disciplined, how obedient, how sharply intelligent he was. A K9 trained at the highest level didn't just ignore commands. He didn't ignore familiar voices, and he definitely didn't break protocol at a funeral. So why now? Nearby, a woman sobbed softly. "He loved her so much," she whispered to another. "She used to feed him treats through the fence. They were inseparable." The person beside her nodded, though fear clouded her expression. "But why is he acting like this? It's almost like he's warning us." Shadow suddenly lifted his head, ears twitching sharply. His eyes swept across the room, searching, analyzing, and then he froze. His muscles stiffened. His breath quickened. He locked his gaze on someone standing among the officers. A deep, guttural growl rumbled from his chest, low, long, and furious. The hall went silent. No one knew why the dog reacted this way, but Blake felt his heart drop. Shadow wasn't just mourning, he was accusing. All eyes slowly shifted toward the direction of Shadow's growl. The officers standing along the wall stiffened, exchanging quick, uneasy glances. But the German shepherd wasn't confused, nor was he reacting randomly. His gaze was sharp, locked, with laser-focused intensity on one man in particular. Officer Raymond Cole. Cole stood frozen among the other officers, his posture rigid, his jaw clenched tight. He was normally calm, collected, even admired for his discipline. But now, under the weight of Shadow's unblinking stare, something flickered across his face. A momentary twitch, a crack in his controlled expression. He shifted uncomfortably, adjusting his tie even though it wasn't crooked. A whisper rustled through the crowd like a cold draft. "Why is the dog staring at him like that? Does he know him? What's going on?" Blake narrowed his eyes. Shadow didn't react like this to just anyone. He wasn't easily startled, and he never growled without purpose. The dog's training was built on identifying danger, on detecting lies, on reading the unspoken. And right now, everything about his body language screamed one message. Something about Officer Cole wasn't right. Shadow pressed his head protectively against the girl's body, as if shielding her from the man across the room. His ears were pinned flat, a sign of distress. His muscles trembled, not from fear, but from restraint. He wanted to move. He wanted to confront. But he stayed at the child's side, torn between devotion and instinct. Cole cleared his throat, attempting to steady himself. "What's wrong with that dog?" he asked, forcing a laugh. It came out thin and brittle. "He's acting like I did something." His attempt at humor fell dead in the air. No one smiled. Blake stepped forward slightly, watching Cole's reactions with the trained eye of someone who had interrogated countless suspects. The man avoided eye contact with the coffin. He kept glancing at the exit. His fingers tapped at his belt, restless and uneven. Shadow growled again, louder this time. Cole flinched. That small reaction didn't go unnoticed. A murmur rippled through the officers. Daniels leaned closer to Blake and whispered, "You seeing this too?" Blake nodded slowly, his gut twisted. Shadow wasn't aggressive by nature. If anything, he was famously calm. but now he acted as if Cole carried a scent he couldn't ignore. One he associated with danger, with threat, with guilt. Cole's voice finally cracked. "Someone get that animal under control." Blake's eyebrows lifted. Animals don't lie. Dogs don't accuse without reason. And Shadow, a highly trained canine, had just singled out a police officer at a child's funeral. Something was terribly, terribly wrong. Long before the funeral, long before the tragedy that shattered an entire community, Shadow had been nothing more than a disciplined, highly trained police dog assigned to Officer Blake. He was strong, fearless, and focused, until the day he met a little girl with golden curls and an innocent smile that melted even the hardest hearts. It happened on an afternoon patrol. Blake had stopped by a quiet, suburban neighborhood, checking on a series of break-ins reported over the week. Shadow was sniffing along the sidewalk when he suddenly froze. Blake braced himself, expecting danger, only to hear a tiny giggle from behind a white picket fence. A small face popped out from behind a bush. A little girl, barely reaching Blake's waist, held out a crumbly cookie in her hand. "Doggy," she squealed, "you're the biggest puppy ever." Shadow, the same dog who could take down armed criminals, sat down obediently and tilted his head. The little girl stepped forward without fear and gently placed the cookie into his jaws. Blake was stunned. Shadow never took food from strangers. Never. But for her, he broke every rule. From that day, the girl, named Lily, waited for Shadow and Blake every afternoon. She'd run out barefoot, carrying crumbs in her tiny palms, waving wildly until Shadow trotted over to her. She didn't care that he was a canine. To her, he was simply Shaddy. She'd wrap her arms around his neck, burying her face into his fur, giggling as he nudged her gently with his nose. Shadow, usually stoic and unemotional, softened around her. His tail wagged, his posture relaxed. His eyes gleamed with a warmth Blake had never seen before. Lily's mother once stood on the porch, smiling sadly. "She doesn't have many friends," she confessed softly. "She's always been shy. But that dog, he brings out a different side of her." Blake nodded, watching the girl braid flowers into Shadow's collar. "She's good for him too," he admitted. Never seen him so calm. Over the months, their bond only grew. Shadow listened to her voice more attentively than to Blake's commands. If she cried, he laid beside her until she stopped. If she laughed, he climbed onto his paws, excited and alert. And every time Blake tried to lead him away, Shadow would look back at her, as if promising he'd return. To Lily, Shadow wasn't just a dog. He was her guardian, her friend, her silent protector. And to Shadow, she was the one soul he would give everything for. No one knew then how important that bond would become, or how far Shadow would go to protect her, even after death. The day Lily died began like any other. Sunlight slipping through her bedroom curtains, birds chirping outside, and her tiny feet tapping excitedly across the wooden floor as she prepared to greet her favorite visitor. Shadow and Officer Blake always passed by around the same time, and Lily never missed their arrival. She tugged at her mother's sleeve, begging to wait outside early. "Shaddy's coming. I know it." Her mother laughed softly and tied a pink ribbon in her curls. "All right, sweetheart, but stay where I can see you." Lily nodded enthusiastically and skipped to the front yard, clutching a small bag of dog treats she had saved just for him. But that morning, Shadow and Blake never came. Blake later explained they had been rerouted to a robbery in a nearby district. They had no idea how one small change would shatter everything. Around noon, neighbors reported seeing Lily playing alone near the edge of the street, humming to herself as she arranged her toys. She wasn't supposed to go past the mailbox, but curiosity has no boundaries for a child. A colorful ball rolled from her hands, bouncing toward the sidewalk. Lily chased it, laughing softly, unaware of the danger approaching. A black SUV turned onto the road, driving faster than anyone expected on a quiet street. Witnesses would later say it swerved as if the driver were distracted. Lily's mother screamed her name from the porch, but the little girl didn't hear. The SUV jerked violently. Tires screeched. A chilling thud echoed through the street. By the time neighbors rushed out, Lily lay motionless on the pavement, her pink ribbon fluttering beside her. Her mother collapsed beside her, shrieking for help. The driver, a uniformed police officer, stumbled out of the vehicle, pale and shaking. Officer Raymond Cole. He claimed he didn't see her. He claimed she ran out suddenly. He claimed it was a tragic accident. Blake arrived minutes later, heart pounding, Shadow leaping from the patrol car before it had even fully stopped. The dog sprinted across the pavement, whimpering, licking Lily's face, nudging her tiny hands, desperate for a response. But Lily didn't move. Shadow's howl tore through the neighborhood, raw, anguished, unforgettable. Paramedics tried everything. Her mother begged, sobbed, prayed. But nothing changed. The official report was filed. The incident was labeled accidental. The case was closed within hours. But even then, something about Officer Cole's behavior unsettled Blake. Something didn't fit. Something felt wrong. And Shadow, who never forgot a scent, would soon reveal the truth. This wasn't just an accident. It was the beginning of a mystery far darker than anyone imagined. In the days following Lily's death, the police department tried to return to normal. But something hung in the air, a heaviness no one could shake. The report had been signed, the case marked accidental, and the file tucked neatly into a drawer. But those who had been on the scene, those who had watched Shadow's reaction, and those who noticed the inconsistencies, couldn't let it rest. Blake sat at his desk late one evening, staring at the thin stack of papers in front of him. The official narrative painted a clean story. Lily had run into the street, Cole had been driving under the speed limit, and everything pointed to a tragic misstep. But the details felt wrong, too clean, too perfect, and the more Blake read, the more his gut twisted. Why had Cole been in that neighborhood at that exact time? Why didn't his dashboard camera capture the impact? Why had Shadow reacted to him with such violent recognition? He rubbed his jaw, exhaling slowly. Shadow lay under his desk, but even in sleep the dog twitched, whimpered, and growled as though trapped in nightmares only he could understand. Across the room, Officer Daniels walked in quietly and shut the door behind him. "Blake," he said in a low voice, "I heard you're going over the case again." Blake hesitated before nodding. Daniels sighed. "You're not the only one." He dropped a separate file onto Blake's desk. "I pulled Cole's driving logs. Something's off. His route doesn't match what he reported. He wasn't supposed to be anywhere near Lily Street." Blake's brows tightened. "So why was he there?" "That's just it," Daniels murmured, lowering his voice. "He refused to answer questions beyond the basics. Said he was following a lead, but he never documented one." Blake's stomach sank further. He flipped through the pages again. Several neighbors had reported seeing the SUV earlier that morning, circling, slowing, pausing at corners. Cole denied all of it. And then there was the missing footage. The dashcam had automatically shut off minutes before the collision. Cole claimed it malfunctioned, but there was no request for a repair record, no earlier complaints. Cameras don't just die on their own. Daniels leaned closer. "Shadow knows something, Blake. He's reacting to Cole like he's a threat. Dogs don't fake that." As if on cue, Shadow's head snapped up, ears rigid, a low growl humming from his chest. He gazed at the door, the hallway beyond it, as if sensing the man they were discussing. Blake exchanged a grim look with Daniels. Something wasn't just wrong with their report. Something was being hidden. And whatever it was, Shadow had known from the very beginning. Shadow had barely moved since the funeral. He lay beside Lily's coffin like a statue carved from grief. No food, no water. Only the rise and fall of his chest proved he was still alive. Blake stayed near him the entire time, keeping a quiet vigil, hoping the dog would eventually let go. But Shadow's eyes were always distant, focused on something no one else could see. It happened just after sunrise on the second day of the funeral viewing. The hall was empty except for Blake, Shadow, and a janitor, sweeping quietly in the corner. Blake knelt beside the coffin, gently brushing his fingers through Shadow's fur. "Buddy," he whispered, "you can't stay here forever." Shadow didn't look at him. Instead, he pressed his nose against Lily's small hand one last time, and then he moved. Slowly at first, lifting his head, shifting his weight, stepping out of the coffin with a reluctant ache that made Blake's heart crack. It was the first time the dog had left her side in nearly 40 hours, but instead of collapsing in exhaustion, Shadow stood alert, nose twitching, ears rising with unmistakable purpose. Blake frowned. "Shadow, what is it?" The dog paced toward the exit, then stopped, looking back at Blake with urgent eyes. He barked, short, sharp, insistent. Not a cry of pain, not a plea for comfort, a command. Shadow darted toward the door again, pawing at it this time, whining impatiently. The janitor jumped, startled by the sudden shift in energy. Blake rose to his feet, tension surging through him. "You want me to follow you?" Shadow barked again. Blake didn't need a third cue. He grabbed his jacket, pushed the door open, and allowed Shadow to lead. The dog sprinted down the hallway with determination, nose pressed low to the ground, weaving left and right as if tracing a scent he had memorized. His muscles trembled with urgency. They burst out of the funeral home into the crisp morning air. Shadow didn't pause. He shot down the sidewalk, turned at the intersection, and headed straight into the residential neighborhood where Lily had lived. Blake felt chills run along his arms. "Shadow? Why here?" The dog stopped abruptly in the middle of the street. His body stiffened. His tail dropped. He growled. Deep, low, dangerous. Blake followed the line of Shadow's stare, and his blood went cold. Parked at the end of the street, half hidden behind a row of bushes, was the same black SUV from the day Lily died. Officer Cole's SUV. Shadow stepped forward, hackles rising. For the first time, Blake understood. Shadow didn't leave the coffin to mourn. He left it to lead them to the truth. Blake stood frozen, staring at the black SUV like it was a ghost resurrected from the past. The vehicle sat quietly at the curb, cold and still, its windows darkened. Shadow growled again, inching closer, nose quivering as if confirming a scent he already knew too well. Blake's pulse hammered in his ears. "What are you trying to show me, boy?" he whispered. Shadow pressed his nose to the driver's door, then whipped around and barked sharply, demanding, urgent. Blake swallowed hard. If the SUV was here, Cole couldn't be far. And if Cole was nearby, why was he hiding? Blake called Daniels immediately. Within minutes, 2 patrol cars arrived. Daniels stepped out, eyes narrowing at the sight of the SUV. "That's Cole's," he muttered. "But he's supposed to be off duty today." Shadow tugged at Blake's pant leg, pulling him toward Lily's house. Blake felt his stomach twist. "He wants us inside," he said. They followed Shadow around the side gate into a basement door that hung slightly open. It shouldn't have been. Lily's parents had left town for the funeral, and no one else had permission to enter. Daniels frowned. "We need probable cause to search." A sound echoed from inside. A small thump. A shuffle. Shadow lunged, barking furiously, trying to push his way in. Blake didn't hesitate. He swung the door open. The basement was dimly lit, filled with storage boxes and old toys. But Shadow wasn't sniffing for scents. He was heading straight for the home surveillance setup on the far wall. Blake's breath caught. A monitor was still on. Someone had been watching the footage. Daniel stepped closer, eyes widening as he rewound the video. "This is from the day Lily died," he whispered. "Look." On the screen, Lily played happily in the yard. The recording should have shown her running toward the street, but instead something else appeared. Cole's SUV, creeping down the block, much earlier than he claimed. Shadow whined sharply as Daniel slowed the footage. Cole wasn't distracted. He wasn't speeding. He wasn't even looking forward. He was watching something on his phone. Text messages, repeated messages. Something or someone had been instructing him. Blake felt his jaw clench. He lied. And then the crucial moment. Lily didn't run into the road. She stopped. She looked up, her mouth open to say something. And then she stepped backward, startled, as Cole's SUV swerved directly toward her. Daniel slammed his fist against the table. "This wasn't an accident." Shadow barked in agreement, his eyes locked on the screen. But the worst part, a second figure appeared off camera. Just a shadow, just a movement. Someone else had been there, and that someone didn't want Lily alive. By the time the sun dipped behind the rooftops, the station was buzzing with whispers. Blake and Daniels had brought in the newly uncovered footage, and word had spread like wildfire. For the first time since Lily's death, officers were questioning the man they once trusted without hesitation. Officer Raymond Cole. Cole sat inside interview room 3, tapping his fingers nervously against the cold metal table. His uniform looked crisp, but his face betrayed him, sweat gathering beneath his collar, jaw twitching every few seconds. He kept glancing at the door, waiting for someone to tell him he was free to go. No one did. Blake entered with a tablet under his arm. Shadow followed, leash tight, posture rigid. The dog's eyes narrowed the moment he saw Cole. His growl wasn't loud this time, not like at the funeral, but it was deep, controlled, dangerous. Cole stiffened. "Get that dog out," he snapped sharply. "I don't feel safe with it here." Blake ignored him and took a seat. "Funny," he said quietly. "Shadow's never had a problem with anyone before. Only you." Cole scoffed, but it came out shaky. "He's an animal. Animals get confused." "No," Blake said calmly. "Shadow doesn't get confused. He remembers sense, he remembers fear, and he remembers guilt." Cole's jaw clenched. "Are you accusing me of something?" Blake placed the tablet on the table and pressed play. The footage began to roll, the SUV creeping down Lily Street long before the incident. Cole's face paled instantly. He swallowed hard. "This isn't what it looks like." "It looks like you were lying," Blake replied. "It looks like you were patrolling a street you weren't assigned to, and your dash cam conveniently shut off the moment things went wrong." Cole shifted in his chair, breathing quickening. "I told you, it malfunctioned." Daniels entered the room, arms crossed. "That's funny," he said, "because tech checked it this afternoon. No malfunction, no wiring issue. Someone turned it off manually." Cole's lips parted, but no words came out. Shadow stepped forward, eyes locked on him. His nose twitched. He remembered the scent of the man who held Lily moments before she died, and he remembered the fear she felt. Blake leaned forward. "Why were you near her house hours before the accident? Why didn't you report being in the neighborhood? What were you doing?" Cole's voice cracked. I was following up on something." "On what?" Daniels pressed. Cole looked away. His breathing turned shallow. I can't say." Shadow barked sharply, startling him. Blake's eyes hardened. "Can't," he said slowly, "or won't." Cole finally met Blake's stare, and in that moment, Blake knew. Cole wasn't protecting himself. He was protecting someone else, and that someone was still out there. Shadow had been silent for hours, lying at Blake's feet while Cole's interrogation dragged on. But the moment Blake stepped into the evidence room to review the recovered items from the SUV, something inside the dog changed. His ears shot up, his body stiffened, his nose lifted into the air, scenting something only he could detect. Blake noticed immediately. "You smell something?" Shadow didn't answer. He leapt. He rushed to a shelf stacked with sealed bags, clawing aggressively at one in the middle row. Officers nearby jumped back in alarm. Blake hurried toward him, eyes narrowing on the label. E47, recovered from Cole's SUV trunk, unidentified fabric. Shadow whined loudly, pawing the bag as if begging Blake to open it. The dog's distress was raw, trembling, unmistakable. Blake exchanged a look with Daniels. "Open it," he ordered. A technician sliced the seal. The moment the bag opened, Shadow shoved his nose inside, then let out a piercing, broken howl that echoed through the entire room. The kind of howl only heard when a dog finds a missing child, or the last thing that belonged to them. Inside the bag was a small piece of fabric, glittery, pink, a ripped fragment of a dress. Lily's dress. Daniels exhaled sharply. This wasn't listed in the original report. Blake's hands trembled as he held the fabric. Her mother said the dress she wore that day was intact when she bought it. There were no tears. Shadow nudged the fabric again, sniffing with deep, frantic breaths. Then suddenly he snapped his head toward the door, barking furiously. Blake frowned. "You want us to follow again?" Shadow bolted into the hallway. Daniels hurried after him. He's tracking something. A scent from the cloth. The dog sprinted through the corridors, down the stairwell, and out the back exit of the station. Night air hit them like a cold slap. Shadow didn't slow. His nose stayed glued to the ground. He wasn't following Lily's scent. He was following something or someone that had been close to her. Shadow came to a stop behind the station near the dumpsters. He barked sharply at a corner of the lot, an area where officers usually smoked or made private calls. Blake's flashlight swept the ground. His breath hitched. A set of footprints, partially smudged, leading away from the station. Daniels knelt beside them. These aren't Cole's boots. Shadow lowered his head and growled, deep and furious. Someone else had handled Lily before she died. Someone who left traces behind. Someone still close to the department. Blake felt his blood run cold. This wasn't just Cole, he whispered. Shadow barked once, sharp, certain. It was bigger, much bigger. The discovery of Lily's torn dress fragment changed everything. Within the hour, Blake and Daniels were in the medical examiner's office, Shadow pacing anxiously at their heels. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a cold blue hue across the examination room. The air felt heavy, too heavy for a place meant to bring clarity. Dr. Harper, the chief medical examiner, stood by a metal table, her gloves already on. She looked tired, troubled. I reviewed the initial report, she said quietly. The autopsy was rushed, too rushed. They classified the cause of death as blunt force trauma based on external injuries alone. She paused, eyes darkening. There were things I questioned that day, but I was told to sign off quickly. Blake exchanged a sharp look with Daniels. Told by who? Harper hesitated. Cole. He said the department needed answers fast. Shadow whined, nudging the table leg with his nose, restless and uneasy. Harper opened the second file, the photos, the notes, the outlines of Lily's injuries. But she didn't stop there. She pulled out new scans she performed that morning, after Blake urgently requested a second look. She pointed to an image. Here, the bruising pattern on her ribs. Daniels leaned in. That's, not consistent with being hit by a car. Harper nodded grimly. Exactly. These marks, she traced a gloved finger over the diagram, are from being grabbed, hard, by adult hands. Blake felt his stomach drop. And these, Harper continued, flipping to another scan, are compression marks on her upper arms. She met their eyes. She didn't fall into the road. She was restrained. Shadow let out a deep, trembling growl, the kind that came from recognizing something he couldn't verbalize. Harper swallowed. There's more. She brought up a magnified image of Lily's neck. Petechiae, burst blood vessels. This is usually seen in cases of oxygen deprivation. Someone covered her mouth or pressed something over her face right before the impact. Daniel stepped back, horrified. So she was already unconscious when the SUV hit her. Blake's voice barely came out. Meaning the car wasn't what killed her? Harper nodded slowly. Correct. The vehicle impact didn't cause her death. She died moments before it. Shadow abruptly barked, loud, sharp, insistent. He moved to the corner of the room, claws scraping against the floor, nose pushing against the cabinet containing Lily's personal items collected from the scene. Harper frowned. That cabinet was sealed. Daniels walked over, opened it, then froze. Inside was a small glittering pin, a police-issue lapel pin. Not Cole's, not from his department. Blake felt a chill crawl through him. Someone else had been with Lily, someone higher ranked, someone protected. Shadow stared at the pin, growling. The truth was unraveling, and the real culprit had just stepped into the light. The room felt colder after the discovery of the mysterious police lapel pin. A tiny object, but heavy enough to shift the entire investigation. Blake turned it over in his hand, staring at the engraved initials. A.R. Daniels' voice trembled. That pin belongs to Assistant Chief Robert Avery, one of the highest-ranking officers in the department. Blake's chest tightened. Avery was respected, feared, and almost untouchable, but the presence of his pin among Lily's belongings was impossible to ignore and impossible to explain away. Shadow paced restlessly, sniffing the air, nudging Blake's leg, urging him again. He wasn't done. He hadn't shown them everything. "Where now, boy?" Blake whispered. Shadow sprinted for the door. Daniels and Blake exchanged a tense look before following him out of the medical examiner's office, through the hallway and into the parking lot. The dog's nose stayed glued to the ground, tracing the scent from the pin, the dress fragment, the evidence no human could interpret as precisely as he could. Shadow suddenly veered left, toward the restricted section of the police lot, where senior staff vehicles were parked. Blake's pulse quickened. "Is he going to Avery's car?" Daniels muttered. Shadow didn't stop at the assistant chief's black SUV. He sniffed it, growled once, then kept going, past the lot, past the station, toward a path leading behind the precinct, one most officers never used. The narrow walkway was overgrown with weeds and led to a maintenance shed used for old equipment and storage. No cameras, no foot traffic, isolated. Shadow halted in front of the rusted door and barked with fierce urgency. Blake's hand hovered over the handle. "This shed. No one's used it in years." Daniels shook his head. "Not officially." Blake pushed the door open. A wave of cold, stale air drifted out. The interior was dim, but a faint glow flickered from a light in the back. Dust swirled in the beam of Blake's flashlight as he stepped inside. Shadow darted to a large metal locker along the back wall. He pawed violently, claws scraping metal, barking like his heart might break. Blake yanked the locker open. Inside were items that didn't belong there. A child's backpack, a pair of tiny shoes, a blood-stained cloth, and a small stuffed toy, Lily's favorite bear. Daniel stepped closer, horrified. Dear God, these were never in evidence. Shadow nudged the bear gently, his eyes reflecting raw, aching grief. Then he turned his head sharply toward a stack of documents shoved behind a toolbox. Blake pulled them out, pages of secret communications, unauthorized call logs, and surveillance photos of Lily, taken days before she died. Daniel's voice cracked. This wasn't an accident. This was planned. Shadow growled at the doorway, because someone was watching them, someone who didn't want them discovering the truth hidden inside the shed. Blake's flashlight trembled in his hand as the shadows in the shed shifted. Daniel stepped forward instinctively, placing himself between the door and Blake, his hand hovering near his holster. Shadow's growl deepened, low, rumbling, ready to erupt if needed. Someone was outside, someone who had followed them, someone who wasn't supposed to know they were here. A slow crunch of gravel, a faint exhale, and then Assistant Chief Robert Avery stepped into view. His uniform was immaculate, his posture calm, but his eyes, those cold, calculating eyes, landed on the shed with unmistakable menace. "Officers," he said, voice smooth as glass, "why are we rummaging through restricted property?" Blake felt a chill crawl down his spine. Avery didn't ask what they had found. He already knew. Daniel spoke carefully. "Sir, we found evidence related to Lily's case. Evidence that shouldn't have been here." Avery's expression didn't shift, not even a flinch. "Then close that locker. And forget whatever you think you've discovered." Shadow barked viciously, lunging forward, teeth flashing. Blake held him back, but the dog didn't stop snarling. Avery watched him with thinly veiled disdain. "That dog," Avery murmured, "has been a problem from day one." Blake's blood boiled. "Shadow found Lily's belongings. You didn't think anyone would ever look here, did you?" Avery sighed, almost bored. "I tried to handle this quietly. You two had no involvement in this investigation anymore. Yet here you are, making things complicated." Daniel stepped closer. "You were there the day Lily died." Avery didn't deny it. Blake's chest tightened. "Why? Why would you be anywhere near her?" A long, chilling pause followed. Then Avery finally spoke. "Cole wasn't acting alone," he said calmly. "He was following orders. Mine." Blake felt the world tilt. Avery continued, voice eerily steady. "A complaint was filed against me, a harassment accusation from Lily's mother." He shook his head. "Unfounded, of course, But a scandal like that destroys careers, families, everything. Daniels stared at him in horror. So you tried to scare her? Threaten her? Avery smirked. I only told Cole to remind her who she was dealing with. Unfortunately, he panicked. The girl ran. Things escalated. Blake's voice cracked. You covered it up. Of course I did, Avery replied coldly, for the sake of the department. Shadow barked violently, pulling so hard that Blake nearly lost grip. Avery took a step forward, and that's when the truth became undeniable. Shadow didn't growl because Avery was guilty. Shadow growled because he recognized Avery's scent. The same scent from Lily's torn dress. The same scent from the pin in her belongings. The same scent from the person who grabbed her. Lily hadn't stepped into the road at all. She had been running away from Avery, and Shadow had known it from the very beginning. The moment Avery stepped forward, Shadow lunged with a fury no one had ever seen before. Blake barely held him back as the German Shepherd snapped and snarled, teeth bared, every muscle trembling with rage. Avery didn't flinch. He simply smirked, lifting a hand as if shooing away a stray dog. You can't prove anything, he said calmly. The girl is gone. The report is closed, and you two are overstepping your rank. But Blake wasn't listening anymore. Not to the words, not to the threats. He was focused on Shadow, because the dog wasn't growling at Avery's face. He was growling at Avery's jacket, more specifically, at the faint bulge inside the inner pocket. Daniels, Blake whispered urgently, check his coat. Avery's eyes flickered, just enough to give him away. Daniels moved in, but Avery reacted faster. He grabbed the jacket edge, ripped it open, and sprinted toward the shed exit. Blake shoved Shadow aside. Go! Shadow bolted after him, claws scraping the dirt, his powerful body launching forward like a missile. Avery reached the trees behind the shed, but the dog was faster. He tackled Avery to the ground, pinning him with his full weight, snarling inches from the man's throat. Blake and Daniels arrived seconds later, wrestling Avery's arms behind his back as Shadow growled continuously, refusing to move until the cuffs were secure. Something fell from Avery's pocket and hit the ground with a soft clink. A small locket, pink, glittery, lilies. Daniels picked it up with trembling hands. He kept her locket all this time. Avery spat on the ground. She shouldn't have fought back. Shadow barked, a vicious, fury-filled bark that shook every nerve in Blake's body. But before Blake could process anything, Daniel's radio crackled. Unit 3, urgent update. You need to return to the medical center, immediately. Blake grabbed the radio. What happened? A trembling voice answered, It's about Lily. Blake's heart froze. Minutes later, Shadow and the officers rushed back to the medical center, Avery now in cuffs, cursing under his breath. The hallway was filled with frantic nurses and staff. Blake pushed through the crowd. Where is she? He demanded. A doctor stepped forward, eyes wide. We were preparing to transfer her to the morgue when her fingers twitched. Blake's breath caught. Shadow whimpered softly. What are you saying? Blake whispered. The doctor swallowed hard. Lily is alive. The world seemed to stop. Shadow let out a soft, broken whine, half disbelief, half joy, and sprinted toward the recovery room. Blake followed, heart pounding so violently he could barely breathe. Inside the small room, Lily lay on a hospital bed, pale but breathing. Her eyelids fluttered. Her tiny hand twitched. Shadow climbed beside her gently, pressing his nose into her palm. Her fingers curled around him. Blake's eyes filled with tears. Against all odds. Against every lie. Against the man who tried to silence her. Lily was alive. The hospital room was silent, except for the soft, rhythmic beep of the monitors and the gentle breaths of a child who was never supposed to open her eyes again. Blake stood frozen in the doorway, unable to speak, unable to think, barely able to believe what he was seeing. Lily's fingers moved again, curling instinctively around Shadow's fur as the dog pressed himself against her side, trembling with relief. Her mother rushed into the room moments later, collapsing to her knees with a choked sob. My baby, she cried, touching Lily's cheeks, her hair, her tiny hands, as if fearing she might disappear again. Her father wrapped his arms around them both, tears falling down his face. Shadow watched them quietly, head resting on Lily's shoulder, his chest rising and falling with deep, emotional breaths. For the first time in days, he wasn't growling. He wasn't pacing. He wasn't mourning. He was protecting her, just like he always had. Dr. Harper entered the room cautiously. "She's weak," she whispered, "but stable." The oxygen deprivation caused her to slip into a deep unconscious state, one that mimicked death. If Shadow hadn't reacted at the funeral, we might never have discovered it in time. Blake swallowed hard. "He tried to tell us. He never left her side." Harper nodded. "He saved her." Outside the room, officers gathered in silent shock as news spread. Avery was already in custody, his crimes exposed through the shed evidence, phone records and Cole's confession. The department was reeling, an entire chain of command shaken by a truth they never imagined existed. Cole, now broken with guilt, admitted Avery's threats and manipulation, revealing the full depth of the cover-up. Daniels approached Blake quietly. "Internal affairs is taking over. Avery won't see daylight again. And Cole, he's cooperating, but he'll be imprisoned too." Blake exhaled slowly. "It's over then." Daniels shook his head. "No, it's over because of Shadow." Back in the room, Lily's eyes fluttered open. Her mother gasped, leaning close. "Sweetheart, can you hear me?" Lily blinked, groggy but awake. Her gaze moved slowly across the room until it landed on Shadow. A tiny smile formed. "Shaddy," she whispered, her voice fragile as paper. Shadow's tail thumped gently against the bed. Blake couldn't hold back anymore. He wiped a stray tear from his cheek. For all his years on the force, all the rescues, all the crimes he'd solved, nothing felt as powerful as this moment. A child saved, a monster exposed, a loyal dog proving once again that some heroes don't wear badges. They protect them. As the sun rose outside the window, casting warm light over the room, Blake whispered, "You did it, Shadow. You brought her back." Shadow pressed his head against Lily, eyes closing peacefully. And for the first time since the tragedy began, everything finally felt right again.